Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar conquered Gaul, crossed the Rubicon, and made himself the single most powerful man Rome had ever produced. 50 pitched battles, roughly 1 million enemies dead by his own later boasting, and an army so loyal to him personally that they'd followed him into civil war against the Republic itself. He forgave his enemies instead of executing them, a mercy that history would punish him for. On the Ides of March, 44 BC, more than 60 senators surrounded him in the chamber at the theater of Pompey. Among them stood Brutus and Cassius, men he had pardoned after they fought against him, men he had personally promoted into power. He was stabbed 23 times. Ancient sources agree only one wound was fatal. The rest were panic, hesitation, senators too afraid to strike first and then unable to stop once the first blade went in. He is said to have stopped resisting the moment he saw Brutus among his attackers. Within 2 years, nearly every conspirator involved was dead by suicide or in battle, hunted down one by Caesar's adopted heir, a teenager named Octavian who would go on to become Augustus, Rome's first emperor. Emperor Caracalla. Emperor Caracalla ruled an empire he'd helped seize by murdering his own brother in their mother's arms to remove him as a rival. He extended Roman citizenship to nearly every free man in the empire and led brutal campaigns against Germanic tribes and the Parthians, a military man through and through, always with the army, rarely in Rome. In April 217 AD, marching between Edessa and Carrhae in Mesopotamia, he stopped his column so he could relieve himself on the side of the road. His bodyguard, a man named Justin Martialis, whose own brother Caracalla had recently had executed, walked up beside him and drove a blade into him while his back was turned. The Emperor of Rome, master of a dozen legions, died in a ditch with his pants down, killed by the one man whose entire job was to make sure that never happened. The Praetorian prefect Macrinus, widely suspected of orchestrating the whole thing, became emperor within days. Albrecht von Wallenstein. Albrecht von Wallenstein built an army from nothing during the 30 Years' War, funding and equipping over 100,000 men through sheer financial genius and ruthless requisitioning, becoming so powerful that Emperor Ferdinand feared him more than any enemy on the battlefield. Wallenstein won victory after victory for the Catholic Habsburgs, was dismissed once out of court jealousy, and was then begged to come back when the war turned disastrous without him. He did, and he won again. But by 1634, rumors reached Vienna that Wallenstein was secretly negotiating with the enemy, possibly to switch sides entirely and carve out his own kingdom. The emperor didn't wait for proof. He issued a secret order. On the night of February 25th, at the fortress town of Eger, a group of Wallenstein's own officers, men who had dined with him, fought under his banner for years, stormed his bedchamber. An Irish mercenary captain named Walter Devereux ran him through with a partisan spear, while Wallenstein reportedly said nothing at all. He simply spread his arms and took it. The general who never lost to an enemy army was undone entirely by his own command staff, acting on paperwork signed in a palace hundreds of miles away. Quintus Sertorius. Quintus Sertorius was one of Rome's most brilliant renegade commanders, a general who fled to Spain during Rome's civil wars and, with a ragtag mix of loyal legionaries and local tribes, built a breakaway state that held off wave after wave of armies sent by Rome to crush him. He was so effective that the Senate eventually sent Pompey the Great himself, one of Rome's finest generals, and even Pompey couldn't finish him. Sertorius kept a tame white fawn he claimed could speak to him with divine guidance, a piece of theater that helped hold his superstitious tribal allies together for years. His downfall wasn't a battlefield at all. His own second-in-command, a jealous and increasingly resentful officer named Marcus Perperna, had grown tired of standing in Sertorius's shadow. In 72 BC, at a banquet meant to celebrate a victory, Perperna's men staged a drunken brawl as cover. In the chaos, Sertorius was seized and stabbed to death by his own officers at the dinner table. Perperna took command of the army within days, and lasted only a matter of months before Pompey crushed the now leaderless rebels and had Perperna executed too. Alboin, king of the Lombards. Alboin was the Lombard king who led his people out of the Danube basin and carved out a kingdom across northern Italy, a warrior so feared that his own soldiers drank victory toasts from the skull of a rival king he had personally killed in battle, the skull of his own wife's father. That detail alone should have told him how this story would end. Rosamund, forced for years to drink from her father's skull at Alboin's banquets, finally had enough. In 572 AD, she conspired with her husband's own foster brother and his personal bodyguard, arranging for Alboin's sword to be tied fast to its scabbard so it couldn't be drawn. That night, the men she'd recruited broke into his chamber. Alboin reached for his blade and found it useless in his hand. He was cut down defenseless in his own bed by men who had sworn to protect him, in a plot led by the wife he had humiliated for years. Michael III. Michael III inherited the Byzantine throne as a child and grew into a reckless, hard-drinking emperor, nicknamed the Drunkard. By later chroniclers, though, he was also a capable enough commander to personally lead campaigns against the Arabs. His fatal habit was elevating unqualified favorites to power out of personal affection rather than merit. His greatest favorite was a rough, illiterate, but physically imposing stable hand named Basil, a man Michael pulled out of obscurity, made his closest companion, and eventually crowned as co-emperor, effectively naming him heir. Basil repaid the favor in September 867. After a night of heavy drinking, Michael retired to bed, too intoxicated to so much as bar his own door. Basil and a group of conspirators walked straight in. Michael woke up just long enough to see them coming. He was hacked to death in his bedchamber by the very man he had raised from nothing to co-ruler of the Byzantine Empire. Basil took the throne the next morning and founded a dynasty that would rule for nearly 2 centuries. Sultan Osman II. Osman II became Ottoman Sultan at just 14 years old and grew into a young ruler determined to break the power of the Janissaries, the elite slave soldier corps that had grown arrogant, undisciplined, and increasingly impossible to control. He planned to replace them with a new loyal army recruited from Anatolia and Syria, and made the fatal mistake of letting that plan become public before he had the strength to enforce it. In May 1622, the Janissaries mutinied. They stormed the palace, dragged the teenage sultan from his own throne room, and imprisoned him. What followed was less an execution than a ritual humiliation. The same soldiers who had once sworn absolute loyalty to the House of Osman paraded him through the streets before dragging him to Yedikul fortress. There, on May 20th, 1622, he was strangled, reportedly with a bowstring, by the very corps he had tried to reform out of existence. He remains the only Ottoman Sultan ever murdered by his own soldiers in an open mutiny, a killing so shocking it triggered decades of instability across the empire. General George S. Patton. General George S. Patton survived the entire Second World War, slapped soldiers, feuded with Eisenhower, and drove his tanks across Europe faster than his own supply lines could keep up, only to die in December 1945, months after the fighting had ended, from injuries sustained in a low-speed car accident in occupied Germany. He lingered for 12 days in a hospital bed, paralyzed from the neck down, before dying quietly of a pulmonary embolism. The official story has never fully satisfied everyone. Patton had grown publicly critical of Allied policy toward the Soviets and was reportedly planning to leave the army and speak out. Some researchers and at least one self-described former intelligence operative have alleged the crash and his death were arranged, an assassination dressed up as an accident by parties within his own government uncomfortable with what he might say next. No hard evidence has ever surfaced to confirm it, and most historians treat it as an unproven conspiracy theory. But the fact that a man who survived Patton's tanks, mines, and machine guns across 3 years of war died in a car traveling under 30 miles per hour has kept the question alive for 8 decades. Tsar Paul I. Tsar Paul I inherited the Russian throne after his mother, Catherine the Great, and immediately set about reversing nearly everything she had built, purging the military of officers loyal to her, imposing bizarre and humiliating new codes of discipline, and growing so paranoid and erratic that he had a moat dug around his own palace. It didn't save him. In March 1801, a group of his own Imperial Guard officers, men whose careers he had personally wrecked or threatened, broke into his bedroom at the Mikhailovsky Castle in the middle of the night. Accounts differ on exactly what happened next, but the most consistent version has him beaten with a sword hilt and then strangled with an officer's own sash in a room he had built to be unreachable. His son Alexander was waiting in the next room, aware the coup was happening and doing nothing to stop it. When told his father was dead, Alexander reportedly broke down in tears, only for one of the conspirators to remind him bluntly that it was time to go rule and to act like an emperor. Nader Shah. Nader Shah dragged Persia back from collapse and built one of the most terrifying war machines of the 18th century, sacking Delhi in 1739 and hauling home the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond itself. He was a battlefield genius who never lost a major campaign, but success curdled him. In his final years, he grew paranoid and savagely cruel, blinding his own son on a mere suspicion of treason and taxing his exhausted empire into open revolt. By 1747, several of his own generals, convinced he intended to purge the officer corps entirely, decided to strike first. On the night of June 19th, a group of his own Kizilbash commanders crept into his tent at Fathabad and cut him down as he slept. One of the men who dealt the fatal blow, Salah Bey, was reportedly a nephew he had personally raised through the ranks. The empire he'd built by the sword unraveled within months, fractured by the very officers who had once conquered half of Asia at his side. An Lushan. An Lushan rose from a mixed Sogdian-Turkic frontier trader to become one of the most powerful generals in Tang Dynasty China, commanding nearly a fifth of the empire's entire army along its northern border. Fat, cunning, and a favorite of Emperor Xuanzang, he used that trust to launch a massive rebellion in 755 that nearly toppled the dynasty and plunged China into one of the deadliest civil wars in human history. But by 757, blinded by cataracts, in constant pain from boils covering his body, and increasingly vicious toward everyone around him, he had become unbearable even to his own household. His own son and Qingxu conspired with a eunuch servant and a top general to end it. They crept into his tent at night and stabbed him through the stomach, his own son giving the order while he lay half-blind and unable to even see his killers clearly. He died on the same bedding where he had once plotted the fall of an empire. Aurelian. Aurelian was the Roman emperor who single-handedly stitched the crumbling empire back together, crushing the breakaway Gallic and Palmyrene empires and earning the title Restorer of the World in under 5 years on the throne. A career soldier with a reputation for brutal discipline, he was marching his army toward a campaign against Persia in 275 AD when a scheming secretary named Eros, fearing punishment for a minor lie he'd told the emperor, forged a document. The fake list named several of Aurelian's own top officers as targets for imminent execution. Believing their lives were already forfeit, the terrified officers struck first, surrounding the emperor's tent near Byzantium and cutting him down before he ever reached the front. When the Senate later learned the entire plot had been built on a single lie, the conspirators were executed in turn, a purge sparked by nothing but one man's fear of being caught. 12 commanders, 12 different empires, 14 different centuries, and the same fatal blind spot every time. Not one of them was beaten by an enemy general on an open battlefield. Every single one was killed by the men standing closest to him, a bodyguard, an officer, a favorite, a son's silence. Power, it turns out, has always been more dangerous facing inward than out,